and welcome to Carers Talk, the podcast for carers, where we share advice, information and carers' experiences. My name's Michelle and I'm your host, and this podcast is brought to you by Carers Trust Solihull. We hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Carers Talk. On this episode, we're going to be talking about contingency planning. I'm going to be speaking to my colleague Kathryn, who is a carers assessment practitioner and specialises in contingency planning within the adult team. Hello, Kathryn.
Hello, Michelle. It's lovely to be here today.
Thank you for taking the time out to discuss this topic with us. Kathryn, do you want to expand a little bit about your role in the adult team?
Okay, so I've been working for the Carers Trust in Solihull for a number of years now, and my main and primary role is carers assessments and carers reviews, and part of the role is leading on contingency planning. Sometimes we hear contingency planning referred to as planning ahead or emergency planning. So I specialise in that role. So I collect resources, I find out what's the latest policy in terms of carers and contingency plannings, and I put that together into, for example, a workshop, or I might create a form for carers to complete as a contingency plan. And I also try to keep my colleagues up to date as well, because now that contingency planning is part of the assessment process, then as a team we all need to be up to date on what support carers can access in making a contingency plan.
That's great. I'm really glad that you mentioned about the different things that a contingency plan can be called, because I think some people can be like, oh, actually, what is contingency? What is a contingency plan? And like you say, we call it a number of things: emergency planning, forward planning. It's all of those things, isn't it?
That's right. I think contingency sounds rather formal.
Yeah.
But on a day-to-day basis, we might be more familiar with planning ahead, or planning for emergencies, alternative care provisions, for example, if we're not able to be in that role for any reason.
Okay then, so for people who may not be aware of actually what an emergency plan is, can you say actually what is a contingency plan?
Okay, so a contingency plan looks at alternative care. So at the moment, the carer is the one who's taking care of the person they look after on a daily basis, or might be a couple of times a week, and they've taken on that responsibility. But what happens, for example, if you as the carer become ill, or you have some medical treatment, routine medical treatment that you need to go in hospital for, maybe overnight or a couple of days, or you become ill or have an accident, what alternatives are you able to put in place for that period of time that you are unable to continue with the caring role? So it might be a short time arrangement, or it might be it might transform or transition into a longer term arrangement. So it's looking at alternative care.
And I think when we say when we think about when we might need these plans in place, it can just be, a lot of people think, if I was taken poorly or I was in a car accident, for example, but it can actually be things like being stuck in traffic and knowing that you're going to be late.
That's right. It might, for example, be that somebody's got several caring roles. There's a part of the demographic who are referred to as the sandwich generation. So they might be looking after older parents and grandchildren at the same time. So something's happened at school and you can't get back, you're picking up grandchildren from school. So there's all sorts of scenarios. So it's
backup, isn't it? I think it's having that backup should anything, for any reason, be that you can't be there for the person that you care for.
That's right.
Yeah, no. And it is really important, and certainly through the work that I've done with carers, I know it's a big worry, isn't it, for carers? What will happen if I'm not around, or if something happens to me?
You're absolutely right, and it is something that carers worry about. And I'm glad actually that we're able to offer support with contingency planning, and also start a conversation with carers about contingency planning, because once we start that conversation, it takes some of that stress away. Well, actually, yes, now that you've mentioned that we can talk to a relative, or maybe we've got a trusted neighbour, or maybe we can have one of the key safes on the door, and it's actually not as a bigger task as we initially thought it was. So it's good that, for example, even as part of the carers assessments and reviews, that we're now talking about contingency planning, because it just opens up the conversation and takes some of that initial worry or concerns that carers might have about the scale of the task.
I think that's brilliant that it's now being a part of, our carers assessments, and that we're doing that, because, like you say, it can seem daunting. And I know there are some barriers, isn't there, for carers thinking about contingency planning, because a lot of the time they're very busy people, carers are, and it can seem like such a task, or they can think that'll never happen. It's easy to put off, I think, isn't it, if you...
That's right. And I mean, we know that across the country there are millions of unpaid carers, and certainly in Solihull we have many thousands of unpaid carers. And we know from research that carers are the last ones to think about their own health and well-being. One of the good things about addressing alternative care is that it requires the carer to actually look at their own well-being as well, taking some of that worry away from them, planning so that if alternative care is needed at any point, then that transition is smoother. If they take some time to get everything down in a plan, then that takes some of the stress out of that as well. So it's also about self-care as a carer as well.
I really like that. It's a form of self-care.
That's right. Well, it can feel like it's another form for carers as well, especially when forms are in large format.
Definitely.
It does feel like, it's just another thing that I've got to do, and I really don't have time for this. And perhaps I don't have the energy or the mental health well-being to look at that as well, the emotional well-being to be able to look at that. So we are able to give carers support to overcome some of those barriers. So, for example, if it seems complicated, we have workshops. You can come along and attend those workshops, and whoever's presenting the workshop will go through what's required to come up with a contingency plan. We also have carers drop-ins where you can come along, sit and talk to other carers. You can share tips and ideas with other carers, and also there's a worker there that you can talk to about more specific aspects of your caring role as well. So there are opportunities to speak to other experienced carers and professional workers, so you can kind of work through some of the apprehension of tackling a contingency plan.
Yeah, and I think when through the workshops, certainly carers have come out, I feel, not only kind of informed but also reassured when they have spoken to other carers who have made plans. Like you said, these plans don't have to be massive and elaborate plans. It can simply be, like you say, making a key safe so that maybe a neighbour can pop round in case you're late, or a trusted friend. It can be something like that. So I do think it's really important, and I would encourage anyone who's a bit unsure maybe to come to one of those things.
Planning ahead or planning for emergencies is also something that we do as part of the carers assessment and review. So there'll be an opportunity for you to have that discussion with a support worker. They will be able to help you identify actually what you already have in place. And one of the things that carers sometimes do miss is that they think they don't have anything, but in fact, when you have that discussion, well, actually, yes, although, for example, my son lives in another part of the country, I do have a good friend who checks in with me once a week, and I do have that key safe. So initially you might think that you don't have anything, but actually you have something already there, and it's just a place to start thinking about what you have and what gaps you have. But it's a conversation you're having with another person, and they will make notes of that while they're carrying out your assessment or review, and it will something that will will go into your support plan. So that's a support to get over that barrier of having to fill in forms.
Yeah, definitely. So Kathryn, how would you start? If I was like, okay, I'm a carer and today, I really need to sit down and think about starting my contingency plan, where would a carer start?
So a starting place, it might be a notebook. It doesn't have to be a formal set of forms that you fill in. It might be a telephone directory, for example, or a notebook. If you just start noting in there who comes to your home on a regular basis, daily, weekly, fortnightly, monthly. Just think about the people who you interact with. So that might be family, might be care agency workers, might be a neighbour, it might be a friend. It doesn't mean always have to be physically coming to your home. For example, if you have a friend and you have a chat on the phone once a week, that's a contact. So just start looking about who you have interaction with. So that's a good place to start with. So, for example, if you become ill at home, that person who rings you on a regular basis hasn't been able to contact you, what would they do? Would they come round and knock at your door? Is there somebody else? Is there a relative they would ring and said, I haven't been able to speak to Jenny for the last couple of days. Is she okay? Things like that. So just think about those kind of conversations and connections, regular connections that you have with other people. Another place to start would be to contact your GP surgery and make sure that you're on their register of carers. That can be quite an important resource for carers for several reasons, but it also helps with contingency planning as well, because the GP then is aware that you do have a responsibility towards somebody else.
And you can ask for that, can't you?
It.
You can ask at the reception or with the GP.
That's it. You don't need to speak to the GP directly. It's something that the receptionist will be able to help you with. And also then, if they know you're a carer, if they have any resources or any sessions for carers, they'll be able to include you with that as well.
Now, Kathryn, I know that we've mentioned, making a note of our contingency plans. Are there any resources that can help carers to do that?
Yes. So once you've had a think about those initial contacts that you have with people in your life, we do have forms that you can download from our website, or you can have one sent to you in the post if you contact our main number. You can start to fill in one of those forms. They're actually quite good forms to fill in with, regardless of contingency or not, because maybe sometimes carers are so busy doing what they have to do on a daily basis, they don't actually think about the amount of work and responsibilities that they have. So sometimes that can actually be a useful process to go through anyway.
Yeah.
But certainly in terms of contingency and alternative care, we do have that form on the website that you can download.
And it's not a scary form. It's not like 10 pages long, is it at all?
It looks like it's 10 pages or more long, but the reason for that is because it's in large print, and we've given quite large boxes for people to fill in, so you can put in as much or as little information as you like, or as is needed in those boxes. But certainly I think it's an interesting process to go through, and we can pinpoint quite a few aspects of the caring role that maybe we haven't really tuned into before as well.
So the other big emergency kind of resource that we have that all carers who are registered with us should get in their pack is a carer's card. Would you like to explain a little bit about how carers can use that in a contingency situation?
Okay, so the carer's card that we send from the Carers Trust in Solihull has the carer's name and their carer's registration number on one side, and on the back of there's a side of the card that you can enter 3 emergency contact numbers. So that is there for a prompt as well. It has a practical application, and if carers look at the card carefully, that should prompt them to think about emergency contacts as well. So that space is there. We would encourage carers to carry their card around with them in a purse or a wallet.
Yes, it's very important.
When they're out and about. So if anything does happen when they're out and about, they can hand that card to somebody in emergency services, or somebody who's there assisting them with first aid. They can hand that card to them, and they wouldn't be alerted that you are looking after somebody at home, and they can contact your emergency numbers then. And that will start the ball rolling in terms of your larger contingency plan.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. It's such a little thing, really, that can make such a difference.
Absolutely.
Just having that card. So, yeah, if you have a carer's card, please do carry it with you. If you are registered with our service and you haven't had a card, please let us know. Or have a look if your card is still in date, because many keep it in the back of the purse and forget about it, which is fine, but check it's still in date, and if so, give us a call on our number. And what I would say as well is to make sure that the person you are putting as an emergency contact know that they are an emergency contact, and that they are kept in the loop with your situation. And sometimes the person that we want maybe to be an emergency contact, so say if it's your daughter, but your daughter you struggle to get in contact with her because maybe of her job, maybe you have to think about, is she the best person to contact? Is she the most contactable person? And have a chat about that and those things, because if you are in an emergency situation, it's important.
That's it. So one of the considerations would be how easy is that person, how easy is it for that person to be contacted? Are they near a phone? Are they confident answering the phone? Are they the kind of person who would keep their cool in an emergency? And are they available? Do they need to take public transport? Do they have a car? Do they live, a couple of doors down? So there are all of those things to be taken into consideration. But that's where the conversation with people is very helpful, and you'll be able, if you start filling in parts of the contingency plan in advance of those conversations. For example, what you do for the person that you look after, what does their day look like? And then you're able to look at that form while you're speaking to the person that you're considering to ask to be an emergency contact for you. So you can say to them, look, Uncle Joe needs a cup of tea. He's used to having a cup of tea at 4:00, and then he'll watch whatever the afternoon program is. If you can just have those things, that will keep him going till the next morning when the carers come in. So if you start filling in parts of the contingency plan that you can do, and usually those are the bits about your input and about what your looked after person's day looks like, then you can use that in the conversation.
Now, another resource that has been used for a little while now is the Lions message in a bottle scheme that some carers might be aware of, but if they're not, do you mind explaining what that's about?
Yes, so the Lions Club emergency message in a bottle, many people have probably seen them but not realised what they are. And many people might find that they've got one tucked away in a drawer somewhere. So it's a plastic bottle that has a green cross on it, and inside the plastic bottle is a small emergency plan form. So you can write on there all your cared for's details, what conditions they have, who to contact should there be an emergency. And how that works is you roll that form up and you pop it back into the pot. It's got 2 green crosses. One you'll place somewhere in a prominent place if emergency services have to enter your property. So it might be on an inner hallway door, for example. We wouldn't recommend those stickers going on a porch window or on a front window that can be seen from the street. But certainly when emergency services are entering your property, perhaps on a living room door or on a mirror by a hallway table or something like that. So these pots are known to all emergency services, and as soon as that green cross is spotted, they will know that you're looking after somebody and that you do have a plan. And the plastic pot is kept in the fridge, and you will put the other green sticker on the fridge, the front door of the fridge, and that's just a known sign to all the services that you do have that plan there. And it's quite an easy thing to do. It's a two-sided form. So some basic information about your cared for, about medications and emergency contact.
And you can even do it as a carer, can't you? Your medication and things like that.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think that's really important to point out that planning ahead, although the emphasis is on the cared for, carers can also have a plan for themselves as well.
Yeah.
In their own right as carers, but also the carers themselves might have conditions that they need extra support with as well. So definitely the emergency plans work for both the carer and the cared for.
Yeah, they are a fantastic resource, and I think I'm sure they've saved many lives really at the time they've been out.
Yes, if you want, if you'd like to get hold of a Lion's Pot, we're able to supply those to you. So just give us a call on the Carers Trust main number, which is 0121 788 1143, and ask to speak to anybody in the adult carers team, or you can even just leave a message on our answering service or speak to our lovely receptionist, who will then be able to arrange that for you.
Now, I know the NHS, they provide some kind of support around this as well, don't they?
That's right. So if you're cared for or find yourself in hospital for any reason, you can ask them for a contingency plan. They should be able to give you a form, which is very similar to the one that we provide at the Carers Trust in Solihull as well. So there are different services where you can actually obtain support with emergency planning. So the NHS is one of those bodies that will support with emergency planning if you are receiving care from them.
I know a lot of people maybe kind of think and maybe assume that if they were unwell or if they had an accident, social services would then step in and sort the person they care for out. Although that, they do have a duty of care to support vulnerable people, it's not as good as having that backup plan, is it, for a number of reasons?
That's correct. Social services will step in where there's absolutely nothing else in place. But then if you think that somebody's coming into your home and into your caring situation and interacting with your cared for, they're doing that from a basis of having very little information. So without a plan, and the social services have to step in because there's nothing else available, no other resources for the person that you're looking after. They're going to be coming in and they're going to be looking at the caring role and at the cared for situation, really starting from a blank page with either no information or very little information. Now, if there's a plan, even if that plan's only available to social services because that's the only network that's available to you and you cared for, that at least they've got something there that understands both the support that you've been providing to the person you look after, but also what the looked after person's needs are on an up-to-date and regular basis.
Which is so important.
I think so, because if somebody's coming in from outside and your cared for has been used to seeing you, if they've got conditions that affect their mental state, so it could be dementia or other mental health issues, and somebody coming in strange and not knowing that person's routine can be quite upsetting for them. So having a plan, even if social services are called in on an emergency basis, at least they've got that piece of paper that tells them what you've been doing for your cared for, what your cared for's routine looks like, what their needs are on a more up-to-date and personal basis, whereas social services may have seen your cared for a year ago or even 2 or 3 years ago. So that plan gives them a basis, a good basis from where they need to start today with the person that you look after.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Speaking on that, the whole role within a contingency plan of the cared for is important, isn't it?
It's very important, and that form itself, certainly the form that we give out, and the forms that you can get from other organisations as well, looks at what the routines are for that looked after person, and that's an indication of what you're doing. So for example, just getting up in the morning, what's it like getting up for you as a carer and the cared for in the morning? What time of day the cared for has to take their medication, the number of medication, the types of medication is also an indication of what you're doing as a carer as well. Who sorts out that medication? Does it come in a blister pack? Do you have to call the pharmacy on a regular basis? So that, again, indication of the level of input that you have a carer. Are you keeping your cared for company in the afternoon? Do you find specific TV programmes and films that they like to watch, or audiobooks that they like to listen to? Do you take them out in the garden? Do you take them to a day centre for activities? So they're all indications of the level of support that you're giving to the person that you look after. And of course that will then give an indication to the alternative care, whether that's been provided by social services or it's been provided by a private care agency, or even a relative or a friend who's going to come in. That gives them an indication of the level of responsibilities and the amount of input that you have with your carer. So that's why it's really important for both the cared for and the carer to go through that form together, really, wherever possible. I know that's not always possible, but wherever possible, it's a shared activity.
It is, and I think especially, around mental capacity and the rights of the person that a person is caring for, their wishes also have to be taken into account. The cared for has the right to decide who is getting certain information about them and their medical their needs. So I think it is important to have that discussion with them so that they're involved and they're happy and they're comfortable. And I can see that sometimes that may be a bit of an awkward conversation to have. But if you say that this is because we want to make you as comfortable as possible, should anything happen, that can be a way of
That's right. The Mental Capacity Act has 5 principles that, although they're not mandatory for carers, it's good to be aware of that. And there are several reasons for that. But if I just state what those 5 principles are, is the first one is we always assume that the person that's having care is able to make decisions for themselves. The second principle is that if there is any difficulty in making decisions themselves, then we should be looking at giving them the help that they need to be able to make a decision. And thirdly, people have the right to make on what we would term unwise decisions as well. Just like anybody without an impairment or a medical condition would have, sometimes we might just want to do something, that's different, or something that we enjoy that other people might think, well, that's, not very helpful. But everybody has the rights to make decisions. And if at the end of the day, if we're unable to come to a decision with the person that we're looking after, then we are making those decisions for them, it should be a decision that's made in their best interest. So the least limiting and the decision that mostly fits with what we believe they would like to see the outcome to be for them. So the reason why it's important for carers to be aware of the Mental Capacity Act and those principles is because it encourages that conversation between the carer and the cared for. So that really can overcome a lot of fallouts that maybe carers sometimes experience, not only with the person they're looking after, but also with relatives or other people that are involved in the care. So it's good to have the difficult conversation. Mm-hmm. You can keep in a journal that on that day we had a conversation about different aspects of that person's care and what they would like that care to look like. So if you write it down, that's really helpful. And then in the future, if there are any issues or disagreements that arise about the decisions that are being made, then you have that record or that memory or that recollection of having a discussion.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
I think so. For a contingency plan to do its job, I think it does need to have both the carer and cared for on board with it, really.
That's right. So it might be something as simple as, if you've arranged for an emergency contact who's going to come into the cared for's home or living environment, it should be somebody that you know that they're okay with.
Yes.
So you need to have that discussion with them.
Yeah.
There's no point having an emergency contact and they're going to come in and sit with the person that you look after and they just don't get on. There's some, maybe historical fallout, or it's just a person they don't get on with.
Yeah.
So you have to have that conversation, at least for that reason. Other reasons why you need to have that conversation is because there might be some situations where there is no alternative, for example, except for having a care agency come in, or the person that you care for may be going into some kind of respite care for a short while, or might even turn out into a longer term arrangement. But that has to be addressed before the event in order to really allay any worries that person might have about why that's being done and where it's going to be as well. So, for example, if carers and they're cared for are looking at contingency planning, planning ahead and thinking, well, there might become a time where I, as the carer, don't have the health to enable me to continue caring, or the person I'm looking after health has deteriorated, and it might be reasonable that at some point in the future that either care agency coming into a home or somebody maybe having to have more care within a care home environment, have those conversations, visit different care homes in advance of that becoming a reality. And then that can help to give more confidence to both the person you're looking after and to you as the carer about why those things might happen. And also, if you've seen places and you've had care agencies visit you at home, then you've got an idea of the quality of care you're looking at, the level of care you're looking at, and the different types of care environments that are out there. So you're able to make a better choice, really, between the two of you, or between a wider family setting as well.
It definitely helps to be prepared in those situations. It can help, but it can stop things becoming a crisis, can't it? And it can really smooth the process.
You've raised a really good point there, and smoothing the process is a major point of contingency planning. And then, of course, down the line, avoiding a crisis in care. Sometimes we can't avoid, all situations that we might come across as carers, but having that plan in place certainly, as you said, would smooth that transition from you being a carer to somebody else, care agency, a family member, or going into a care home type setting. So definitely thinking ahead. Don't leave it till a later time in your caring role, but start thinking about those things now. And the interesting thing about contingency planning as well, we can see it in the specific context of the carer cared for, but it's actually quite useful for wider family and friends as well. For example, power of attorney is one of the tools that carers and cared fors can use to make those transitions easier. But that contingency plan, we often think about the cared for giving power of attorney to their carer. Mm-hmm. But actually, if the carer themselves has a power of attorney that they've granted to somebody else, whether that's close family member or it's a close friend, that can be actually quite useful as well, because while you as the carer have a power of attorney for the person that you're looking after, and you can deal with making some types of decisions or paying bills for that person or paying their care bills, for example, if something were to happen to you as the carer, who is going to be able to then look after things that you need looking after in your life as an individual as well? So it's extending from that specific relationship between the carer and the cared for, actually to self-care of yourself as the carer, and having people to support you as well.
Yeah, it's very important. So many carers, it may be that they don't actually have family or anyone living close, or some people might not feel they have anyone or any support networks available to them. How would you advise those people when they're making a plan?
Where a carer feels that they don't have any networks to stand in if something should happen to them, I would definitely recommend that they are known to their GP services as a carer. It's important that somebody understands their situation and that they have someone else to look after. So, for example, if the carer is known to the GP and the carer becomes ill, then the GP practice knows that, okay, this person's not well, what's happening to the person that they're looking after. It may be useful for the carer to contact social services and have a care needs assessment carried out for the person that they look after. And if that's not possible for any reason, at least they can request a carer's assessment in their own right. And the carer's assessment will then open up a route to discussing contingency or future planning with a support worker. And it may be that the support worker, when they're having that conversation, can identify sources of support that the carer hasn't thought about themselves, or hasn't recognised that actually there is a source of support there for them. So the carer's assessment or a care needs assessment for the person that they're looking after.
So it's getting really known to social services and getting those things in
That's
place.
right. So becoming known to different services. So, for example, registering with the Carers Trust as an unpaid carer, and then that will give you access to a carer's assessment. It will give you access, if you don't want to have a carer's assessment, it will give you access to a conversation about contingency planning. And that conversation is really important because it is recognised that carers can often become isolated because of their caring roles. So having that conversation with a support worker can then often prompt carers to think about other people that are actually in their network that they haven't thought about before, and also to signpost them to services that they might not have thought about. So, for example, you might think about Solihull Council's gadgets, for example. So thinking along the lines of an alarm. So that can be a really important connection to the outside of the caring environment, to an agency outside, that if somebody presses a button or rings a number, then the other services can then come into play. So having pendant alarms, different types of alarms, because of the way that digital technology is now.
And it's incredible.
That's it.
Yeah, they actually have worked with us in the past and shown the technology of, affordable technology that can make people independent and support carers. Things like pendant alarms, false alarms. They even have front door mats, so you can be alerted if the person you care for is leaving the house, and things like that, in case they wander. It's really good. And I think sometimes we think contingency planning is all about someone taking over your caring role. It can actually include aids to support you in your role.
That's absolutely right. And that's not only for people who don't have a network. it's for all carers. So, for example, going through a contingency plan will probably include a question like, do you have the equipment that you need for yourself as a carer, but also does the care for have the equipment that they need as well? That might then sort of signpost somebody to an occupational therapist assessment to see if they need extra gadgets to support them in the house. So that initial conversation is really important, even for people who don't think they have a network, because there are other mechanisms that can be put in place to safeguard the person that's being looked after and themselves as well. If carers are coming to us to register as carers, they will also be signposted, for example, to Solihull Fire Services for a home safety check. And that can also be prompts as well for having other types of gadgets as well at home. So there are lots of things that can be done for even people who feel that they don't have somebody to rely on if something should happen to them. But it's about having that conversation and for those questions to be asked and those prompts to be made, and signposting as well to the services. That there's a lot of services available in Solihull that are probably useful to mention in terms of contingency planning, and perhaps you wouldn't think about things like, for example, self-care. So one of the extended benefits of having a contingency plan or having a future plan or an emergency plan is that you can actually use them to build in time for yourself as well as a carer, for time for self-care. So, for example, if you've had a conversation as part of making an emergency plan with somebody who's actually been able to, or a group of people who've been able to offer support, you might be able to say, well, actually, that's for emergency, but I would like to have a bit of time away, an afternoon away.
Yeah.
I'd like to go for a coffee with a friend I haven't seen for a long time. Is that something you'd be able to do for me as well?
It opens the door, doesn't
that
it?
That certainly opens the door for you to be able to have that time out to look after yourself as well. And it's also useful, for example, you don't have an emergency, you haven't become ill, but you do have a routine medical procedure planned. Mm-hmm. And so you can use it for that as well. And so that enables you to plan even for the expected as well as the unexpected. Often carers find that they're not talking about their caring role with other people, and they're keeping all that to themselves, and that sometimes can become quite an emotional burden, if it's okay to say that, for carers, because the role is quite isolating at times. So opening up and having these conversations, because they're part of contingency planning, can actually be quite cathartic in some ways for carers, because it might be the first time they're actually talking about what they do as a carer. So it's a way perhaps they may find some support that they didn't know that they had before.
Yes, yeah. It might make other family members more aware of actually what they are doing and, you know, how they can support them. Carers, if you ask, do you need help? And they'll be like, no, I'm fine. But actually, this task enables carers to practically see what they do, and it also practically helps other people to see what they do. So it gives them the opportunity to help, to be that practical help.
That's right. So I think that's a very important aspect, and that's about carer self-care as well. So the contingency plan does help. It is beneficial in a number of different areas.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kathryn, for all of your advice and giving us all the tips and information around contingency planning.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me on, and I hope the information that we put out today is useful for carers out there in the Solihull Borough. And if carers have questions, please do feel free to ring the Carers Trust in Solihull. There is support that you can have with contingency planning, and just make that phone call and just have that conversation with us.
If you're interested in having a contingency plan, or you have questions about contingency planning, please do not hesitate to give us a call on 0121 788 1143. We also run a variety of different workshops, including contingency planning. You can find these in our activities programme within our newsletter. This can be found on our website, which is www.solihull.org. solihullcarers.org. Also on our website, we have our contingency e-learning resource where you can make a plan and access information to help you create a contingency plan. Thank you for listening. We hope it was helpful.